Hello again, everyone. Thank you guys so much for riding with us for these 3 days of this amazing summit that I'm hosting. For those of you who have been following along, thank you so much for that. Make sure that you are constantly checking your emails for updates on interviews, presentations, and even some awesome gifts, right? So in the comments right now, I want you to do me a favor. Let me know which interview that you enjoyed the most, which presentation that you enjoyed the most. I have an amazing client that's about to hop on the screen. Her name is Cortne, and she shares something that I know every one of us who's watching this has had experience, which is loss and grief. All of us has. It has touched us, whether it was immediate, was close to us, or distant. Either way, it has touched you. And we all handle, what Cortne does a little bit differently. But you're going to know that having somebody like Cortne in your corner, having somebody like Cortne in your life and what she does is actually going to bless you tremendously. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Miss Cortne, honey. How are you?
I am wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm just beyond happy to have you here because, like I just mentioned before, all of us deal with grief differently. All of us deal with loss differently. And it's good to have people in your immediate circle, but they're dealing with their own stuff too at times, right? To have somebody like you and what you and your husband offers, your services and things like that, I think that's just going to be such an impact and an asset to women all over the world and everyone who's watching this as well.
Thank you so much for having me as part of the conference, and then just going a little bit deeper right here to have this little one-on-one. And I enjoy being in people's corners. I think people forget at those darkest moments when we're in the corner by ourselves, that's when sometimes that stranger is the person we need in our corner because they don't know all of the backstory. They can just help us push to the forward story that we need. So I enjoy that part of the journey that I play in, pushing people toward their forward story.
Absolutely. I love that forward story. I love that. So I'm going to have you introduce yourself because I know there's a lot of people on here who this is their first time seeing you. So let everybody know who you are and what you do, love.
All right. Well, I am Cortne Lee Smith. I am a grief and loss strategist. And you say, well, what does a grief and loss strategist do? I provide you your unique formula because just as wonderful Leticia said, we all do it differently. And as many people you heard, it's a similar process to everybody, but everybody has something different, unique. Their relationship with that loss and grief is differently. So I give you your unique formula to navigate through that grief so that you can come out still thriving, being more than a survivor, so you can thrive through that and grow with your grief.
I love that. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, like grief is not a one size fits all type of thing, right? So I love how you mentioned that unique factor because everyone grieves differently. Everyone manages and copes with loss differently. And a lot of times the people around us are not willing to understand what we're dealing with or what we're going through, right? Or they may want to impose their method or their strategy of grief onto you. And like I said, it's not a one size fits all type of thing. So I love that you mentioned that, how you work with various different types of women, various different types of even couples. And I think that's amazing. And even going back to your story a little bit, I know this interview is 100% about you, but even your backstory about grief, can you share that a little bit on how you and your partner met and all that?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. If you're talking about me, you're talking about us. I always tell people
that.
Automatically, you're talking about us.
Amen.
So my backstory is I actually lost my husband in 2012. And my current husband, we lost our mate same year, same month of 2012. And let me tell you, when you go through that loss, the first statement you make is, I'm not ever getting married again. I'm not going to ever love anybody again. But God has a way of taking you down a path. And sometimes that path of healing is actually being able to open up to love. And I'm not telling everybody they need to get married again, get in a relationship again, but that total love of yourself again that you need to do to be able to do that reinvention. And it allowed me to be kind of like a love attraction magnet doing that. So that is how I met my husband, because I was able and open to be able to still be happy and find peace on that journey. And that is kind of the backstory. Now, like I tell you, the forward story is what you choose to write right now. And so we turned our backstory into our marketplace ministry so we could actually serve people through their journey. And so that was the good thing for us. Our backstory made up our forward story for us. It gave us that change and transition.
I love that. I love that. And, you know, just like how you mentioned, you talk about me, you talk about us. I'm the same way about us. That's why like we both went together. So you already went through what qualifies you to actually get out there and teach women all over the world on loss and grief. One of the things I want to touch on just a little bit is how do you help women navigate through the loss?
Well, the thing is, the navigation is first identifying the really what you're, that emotion that you're holding on to. Because a lot of us, we identify it as a word and we just call everything grief, but we don't break down those emotional words that compile grief up. You know, we'll say we angry, but we really grieving. We'll say, you know, we disappointed, but we really grieving. And so how do you take those words and change your response and reaction so you're not a bitter person because of it, but you're a better person because of it? So that means you've allowed yourself to grow, you allowed yourself to be stretched. And those are the things that I'm teaching women: grow and stretch in that hardest season of your life. Don't get stuck there. You know, right now, and it's a real great thing, we're doing this in March where we're talking about forward motion, where we're talking about growing, you know, where we're in this month of talking about history. The thing is, a lot of times we get caught up on the historical relationship that we've had with people, that we don't understand our present or how we can build into the future. So as women, we need to know, how can we live in our today and our right now, have our best today, so we can be building up for that greater later.
Right. And you touched on a little bit about, you know, mental health and all those things, and how that is important. How do you feel that grief and loss ties into mental health in general? Yeah.
Grief and loss ties into our emotional health, it ties into our physical health, it ties into our mental health and our spiritual well-being. So grief is actually a component of all of them. We like to make grief like it's this little box, you know, and, you know, once we tie it up and we, you know, drop it in the ground and we say our adieus, grief is over. But grief is something that we actually, it's very mental, because it's the things that we constantly think about, whether it's regret or what could I have done differently. A lot of us get in this God complex, like we're going to prevent other people from having to experience these things. And we're trying to do that, and it becomes a mental strain, or we get depressed in that place because we realize we don't have control over that. Or it becomes like an emotional roller coaster that we just can't get off of. So it spins in all of those areas. And what people have to realize, grief is more than death of a physical person. It's death of our expectations, you know, it's the death of our finances, it's the death of even who we identified ourselves being as one point in our life. Because the woman that I was before I married my husband, I'm a totally different person. But if I had have gotten stuck in the person that I was when my previous husband died, we would have never been able to become one, because I would have been so stuck in saying, oh, I was this kind of wife, I was this kind of woman. But you always have to be ready to reinvent yourself mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
I love that. I love that. It's you know, about breaking that chain. And all in all, while this is all happening, as you mentioned, while we are trying to manage our own personal grief and loss and things like that, our children are watching as well. I learned about grief and loss by watching my parents, you know? So a lot of times, you know, some of us are unfortunate where we get that negative side of grief and loss. You know, maybe people will turn to substances and things like that, and we just replicate that. You know, having somebody like you, which is like, again, like I said earlier, that's outside the bubble, in managing grief and loss like you, which will be in a more safer way, you know, more trusted way. You know, I think that's just a phenomenal thing to have. And which brings me to my next question. And for those of you, what's the word that people say? I forgot the word that people say when someone's about to say something that may bring up emotion and stuff. But the pandemic has definitely transitioned a lot of people, has changed a lot of people's lives, mostly people all over the world, when there was so much death, so much sickness. Every time you turn on the news, those numbers was going up, cases, deaths, things like that. How do you feel that grief and loss has affected, if not changed, your current audience and clientele since the pandemic has happened?
And I think the word you're looking to is how many people can relate.
Mm-hmm.
That emotional word. And I think because of the COVID situation, a lot more people can relate to everybody else's emotional. That's why we're more talking about the mental health of people. We're talking more about self-love. We're talking more about, putting those steps in of resiliency. So we're not in this rubber band place. We're talking about people not being so strong, because it was an era, especially for Black women. And we always say we got to be very strong women. You don't let people see you cry. You don't let people see you sweat. You don't let people in your circle. And the problem with that is if we don't realize a lot of women are under so much pressure that we've gotten to the point, if we have not recognized in these last 2 years, there are more and more people committing suicide. There are more and more people turning to substances due to the fact that we have been on this journey, that we've been suppressing real grief. And we haven't taught grief skills. Like you say, it's a generation and we pass on all of these bad habits because we tell people you need to compartmentalize it. And we're actually imploding inside because there is no place to put these emotions. People have, made going to have a guide through this process. Oh, I don't need a guide. I'm gonna just do what everybody else is doing, even though your relationship and your connection and your emotions and mental state are not the same. You're not dealing with the same thing.
That's right. Amen to that. That is so true. So now jumping into the best part, I think, is your presentation's coming up. So if you could let everybody know, what is your presentation going to be about?
I'm excited because I'm talking about closing that grief gap that we've created. And when I talk about, we've created a bigger gap, even with COVID, everybody's talking about, let's be isolated, let's quarantine ourselves. We've created a gap that even we've got away from some of the basic, empathetic ways to reach out and touch people, by not being able to be in a close-knit place. A lot of the repasts when people can come check on you, so everything has become long distance. So how do we go back and close some of that gap that we've created, that distance and that division that we've created, even in the workplace, not just, out here in our personal lives, but in the workplace, like now we're in this virtual space, how do we close this gap and get back a unified workplace as well? How do we go back to that without fear? And we create a new growth, some new accountability, and some new productivity in that place. And that's that gap that we have to work on. So I'm excited to, dig into that and bring back that unification.
I love that. I love that. Closing that gap, getting into full circle. And definitely, guys, this is a presentation that I promise you that you're probably going to watch over and over again and even share with somebody else. So even though the summit is active right now, definitely, give somebody the link, campbellsuccessevents.com, and have them register as well. So that way they can even get caught up on these replays and stuff. So Cortne, I cannot thank you enough for being a part of this summit. This is an amazing opportunity for people to really get the help that they need. Even now, even though some people may think that we're out the jungle and, out of the woods or what have you, there's always these new transitions that come in life, and death and loss is something that we all come encounter with in life and even in business as well. I have lost some clients during everything that has been transpiring for the past two years, loved ones, things like that. So I love the fact that you are here to offer your services, and not for free, y'all. Okay. Offer what you have to offer so that way you can connect with more people. All right, love. Thank you for hopping on.
Thank you.
All right, guys. And make sure, listen, make sure that you are constantly checking your email. Make sure that you are constantly checking your notifications because we have even more awesome ladies to expose you guys to. Thank you for watching. Bye.